Jackie Pfeffer-Merrill, Director of the Bipartisan Policy Center Campus Free Expression Project, where we promote campus policies and programs that foster a safe and welcoming campus environment for robust intellectual discourse. And I'm delighted to welcome you to today's event, the launch of the Bipartisan Policy Center Academic Leaders Task Force on Campus Free Expression. As many of you know, the Bipartisan Policy Center is a Washington, D.C. think tank that promotes the best ideas from both policies to promote security and opportunity for American families. The aim of this task force is to provide campuses with a reliable roadmap for campus-free expression strategies that adapt to a changing higher education landscape while honoring their unique history and mission and their commitments to diversity and inclusion on their campus. The task force includes a dozen leaders, each of whom has a distinguished record of leadership on campus-free expression issues. It includes civic leaders, former governors, and leaders from all levels of campus, from college presidents and senior administrators to faculty to a 2020 college alumnus. And they hail from campuses of a very wide range, including an HBCU, a Hispanic-serving institution, denominational colleges, and public and private universities from across the country. And now just a few words about today's run of show. Our program will begin today with remarks from Texas Senator John Cornyn and Delaware Senator Chris Coons, who will speak about campus-free expression, civics education, and the role of colleges and universities in preparing the next generation for citizenship and civic leadership. We'll then turn to a moderated discussion with four of our task force members, our co-chairs Chris Gregoire and Jim Douglas, University of Richmond's Ronald Crutcher, and Texas Tech University's Carol Sumner. The conversation will be moderated by Inside Higher Ed reporter Greta Anderson. And we're going to allow lots of time for audience questions and comments. So at any point in the next hour, please share a comment about what you're hearing or pose a question on Twitter using the hashtag BPC Live or on the chat functions on YouTube and Facebook. And now for our opening remarks from Senators Cornyn and Coons, beginning with Senator Cornyn.
Hi, I'm Texas Senator John Cornyn. I want to thank all my friends at the Bipartisan Policy Center for putting together this important project. The freedom to engage and debate ideas in good faith is a central tenet of our democracy and one we need to celebrate and protect. For years, college campuses have been and continue to be some of the best fora to broaden young Americans' perspectives on the world. But without the free and good-natured exchange of political ideas native to our universities, students would be deprived of key opportunities to bolster their understanding of civics and American democracy. This project is critical to ensuring the survival of our great nation, and I applaud the Bipartisan Policy Center for beginning this important conversation. Thanks again to all of you for allowing me to join you virtually today, and stay safe out there.
Hi, I'm U.S. Senator Chris Coons from Delaware. As we're living in one of the most polarized chapters of our nation's political history, it's more important than ever that we teach future generations of American citizens, of leaders, how to create a rich, challenging, and inclusive intellectual forum on college campuses and throughout our national life. Civics education lies at the very heart of that. It's not just about historical trivia, it's about values, skills, mindsets, and an approach. It's about a knowledge of our institutions, our norms, and our national history. So I'm proud to work with Senator John Cornyn of Texas on a bipartisan proposal in this space that would include the USA Civics Act, which I introduced last year with co-sponsors ranging all across the political spectrum, from Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts to Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma. This bill would reauthorize and modernize an existing grant program for university civics courses. Another piece of legislation I'm working on is the Educating for Democracy Act, which was just introduced. It proposes a $1 billion annual investment in civics education from kindergarten through 12th grade to higher education. Universities have an essential role in shaping how future leaders engage with one another across political and cultural differences. So to everyone at the Bipartisan Policy Center, congratulations on the launch of your Academic Leaders Task Force on Campus-Free Expression. I look forward to your recommendations and for strengthening forums of emerging leaders and investing in the vitality and future of our democracy together. Thank you.
I'd like to thank very much Senator Cornyn and Senator Coons for their remarks today to frame our conversation. In this polar time, it is truly heartening to hear senators from both sides of the aisle speak about colleges and universities as for full, inclusive, and challenging discourse, and preparing students for free and good-natured conversation about the ideas that are so important to our democracy. And now we'll turn to our moderated discussion amongst our 4 task force members who are able to be with us here today. The conversation will be moderated by Greta Anderson, reporter for Inside Higher Education. Her beat at Inside Higher Ed is student affairs, and so she has had many occasions to write about student-free expression issues and controversies. Her full bio and Twitter handle are on our event webpage. And before I turn it over to Greta, I'd like to remind our audience that we're really hoping to hear your questions and comments about the conversation today, again, with the Twitter hashtag BPC Live or with the chat functions on YouTube and Facebook. So now, Greta, to you.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you to the Bipartisan Policy Center for having us all here today for this discussion. I'm just going to take a minute to introduce our panelists very quickly. First, we have Governor Jim Douglas, the former governor of Vermont, and Governor Christine Gregoire, who is the former governor of Washington State. We have Ronald Crutcher, who is the current president of the University of Richmond, and Carol Sumner, who is the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer at Texas Tech University. Thank you so much for joining us all today. So first, I wanted to start off by asking why each of you think there has been a renewed focus on campuses for free expression in the last few years. And are there any recent moments or turning points that you feel have happened and stick in your mind as representative of the current very polarized climate that we're in for free speech? And we'll start with Governor Douglas, if you're ready.
Well, there are a lot of examples, I think, in the recent past. As Senator Coons said a few minutes ago, this is a very polarized time in our national experience, and that plays out on college campuses as much as anywhere else. I teach part-time here at Middlebury College, my alma mater in Vermont, and we've had our own experiences with guest speakers being shouted down or disinvited because some in our community didn't think that they liked what they have to say. We've seen faculty concerned about their academic freedom because they wanted to offer some ideas or pursue research that might be a little out of the mainstream. And I've seen students who have said to me that they just don't feel that they can express their views because the orientation ideologically of most of the faculty is very different from theirs. So I think we have a lot of reasons to be concerned about free expression on our campuses. And this is, after all, the place where we're looking to train the next generation of American leaders. This is where they ought to be exposed to a variety of viewpoints, to hear them, to debate them, to challenge them, and in the end, to decide based on that experience how they feel about the issues confronting our country. So it's a critical time, I believe, in the history of free expression in higher education, and that's why I'm really pleased to be joining with the 3 colleagues who are on the program today and a group of others to explore this under the auspices of BPC.
Governor Gregoire.
Thanks, Greta. Well, as I look back over the last couple of years, it's become very clear to me that college presidents are struggling mightily. At the University of Washington, my alma mater, we had an incident where a speaker came to campus and some folks not from the campus came to shout down the speaker. It resulted in some violence. An individual was shot, and all those involved in that were not from the campus. So what happened thereafter was immense criticism against our college president for why would you let that speaker come, to others who were saying you absolutely should have had that speaker come. So we've got a vibrant debate, and we've got our colleges, presidents caught kind of in the middle of all of it. And so we began, a number of governors, Jim Douglas, myself, and others, to encourage college presidents to stay firm, stay strong, that the center of democracy lies on the campuses of those universities, and free speech and civility and citizenship is really to be fostered there. And so we wanted to sponsor and help them in any way we could. The Bipartisan Policy Council took up the issue, and I'm very proud of that, put us all together and has now launched this so that we can be there to make sure that we are building the kind of citizenship for tomorrow that we all want to see happen in this country, despite its division today. And by the way, having been at the University of Washington campus in the late 60s, I can tell you we debated back then just like we're debating today, which is healthy. But at the end of the day, we want to have a civil debate. We want to prove that we've got the kind of citizenship that can lead us beyond tomorrow. And that's where those universities come to play. I want to thank BPC for its great leadership on this issue, and to my colleagues, thanks to each of you for stepping up and being a part of this effort.
And Dr. Crutcher, what about you?
Well, I think that as a college president, I mean, what we see on our campuses represents the horrible polarization that we've just experienced in this last election, for instance, and it's a result of more and more people being unwilling to interact with folks who believe differently than they do, who have different religious beliefs, different ideological beliefs, different races. I mean, if you look at the research from the Public Religious Research Institute, in 2014, about 75% of whites had only other whites as part of their network. In 2016, that percentage was 91%, and you could say the same thing for blacks. For blacks in 2016, it was 83%. So as a college president, I see universities playing an incredible role to help sustain the health of our democracy. I mean, our democracy is not our American democracy is not a fully fledged adult. We are at best, developing adults, if you will, emerging adults. And so we have to take care that the kind of discourse that has made it possible for us to sustain our democracy for these so many years will be continued in the future. And from my perspective as an educator, there's no better place to do that than on a college campus. I see our college, particularly our residential college campuses, as being kind of crucibles where students learn how to be engaged citizens in American democracy. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm very, when Jackie asked me, I was very willing to be a part of this effort.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Sumner?
I agree with all of my colleagues. I would say from my personal experience working in higher education, you have seen the change over time where discussion and debate has become a different kind of rhetoric. And it's not about listening, it's talking at or defend a position. And we're really interested in making sure that people have an opportunity to engage and to learn from each other. That's what the college experience should be about. It should be recognizing that as global citizens, to value what it means to be a part of a democratic society, it's understanding a global perspective. And so that global perspective is experienced when you hear that someone has had a different life or a different role in their household, or that there's a different way that they have a faith, or there's a different way that, I sometimes will talk about the way we eat our cereal. I mean, there are a lot of different ways. And so when I talk about this in my role as a chief diversity officer, I come out of the role of being in student affairs, and I understand the need for our students to be able to understand and model dialogue. And it is much about protecting another's opportunity as it is in protecting my own. And so when we realize that the fabric of this is really based on what we do for another person is simultaneously beneficial to our own ability to speak and to share and to recognize the value of what we bring. So, I know that one of the tenets of this is certainly looking at sharing a difference, but that's what makes us an incredible opportunity, an incredible place, is that colleges and universities are bringing students together that are not necessarily all interested in engineering, and they're not all interested in psychology, and yet they can learn from each other in ways they might not anticipate. And that's the same for faculty and staff, and the community is being a part of their community. So I'm excited to be a part of this, if you can't tell.
Excellent. Thank you all. And my next question has to do with the role of the First Amendment on college campuses, but also how that role might diverge when we're talking about private colleges versus public colleges, whether there's differences in policies and procedures related to free expression, more of a responsibility or commitment on a public campus due to the play of the how the Constitution applies on those campuses. And I'm wondering if first, President of University of Richmond, if you could please start us off as the leader of a liberal arts college, Mr. Crutcher. Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, we just had this discussion. We are, and I'll maybe talk about this a little bit later. We've developed a free expression statement, which is really about to be approved endorsed by the board next month. And what I said when we had some open floor about this is that, we are a private college, therefore we don't necessarily have to abide by the First Amendment, but at the same time, we're educating students to be global citizens, to pursue lives of purpose in a very diverse world, and a world in which they will have to learn how to live by the First Amendment. And furthermore, as one of our values, we value at the University of Richmond a diverse, inclusive community, and central to achieving the goal of having a diverse, inclusive community is the notion of free expression. That is, that people from different backgrounds, cultures, ideologies will learn how to interact with each other in ways that are authentic. And unfortunately, our students don't know that when they come here. We have to help them. That's our role as educators. So, I'll be honest with you, I got a little pushback from the dean of our law school on this issue, but I have remained firm because we're actually educating our students to be global citizens, and in a world where these abilities, the ability to have difficult conversations, to sit down with someone who's not in your own little bubble and have a reflective, thoughtful, civil conversation is going to be required, I think.
And I think that leads nicely also into another question I had about university values and how sometimes values of diversity and inclusion might conflict with free expression values if a student is saying something hurtful, hateful, offensive to some, but sometimes that speech is protected by the First Amendment. Most of the time it is. And how do you communicate those values all at the same time with students who might be hurt or offended by some speech? And Dr. Sumner, could you start us off by talking about your role as a chief diversity officer in that space?
Sure. Well, my introduction to tech, 4 days in, we had a major online incident where some students had posted some things, and it was called Frat Chat. It's been come to be known as that. And then last year, we also had another incident with students in an online forum. So you're not just looking at speech that is spoken to a person in a one-on-one environment. They're posting it for the world to see, and so you're dealing with multiple facets, not just the speech itself, but the implications of what that speech can mean in terms of feedback from individuals that are not on campus and not invested in helping us navigate a very difficult situation where people who are sharing things may or may not know, or they may know and they're just like, well, I didn't see it as offensive. Or it may be meant as hurtful. And I can tell you I've gotten a lot of pushback from students, and I continue to work with them because hate speech is protected speech. And I don't take a disciplinary or conduct approach because I do not believe that that is going to be the first course of anything. If you're looking to address it, we talk about generational. I have a grandson. I talk about him all the time. He's multiracial. He is Black and white and Hispanic and all kinds of energy. I want him to be able to know that no one is better. They are different. And we teach that at a young age so that when they get to the point of being in the university environment, we're not having to address it in the way that it comes out as hateful. However, there are still going to be individuals that are going to have a difference of opinion about certain people and certain things. And the only thing that we can do to address it with authenticity, which is what I love about what Dr. Crutcher shared, it's authentically having conversations to say, is this what you have come to know of the people? It is the personal relationships that allow us to navigate a lot of these difficult situations. And unfortunately, social media doesn't allow us to have those personal relationships. It allows us to stay in our silos and to not navigate difficult conversations in person. Whenever I've engaged a student after these incidents have taken place, I'm pretty forthright. So I'll ask, are you a person that would be considered racist? I'm asking not because I don't want to respect your opinion. I need to know how I'm addressing the conversation. And inevitably, when I've had that with a student, they were like, no, it was a joke. Or, we get to the kind of the crux of what's happening. And I'm not saying that everyone doesn't believe that, that doesn't have racist opinions, or they don't speak with hateful speech, and they mean it. But I think that we have got to be able to say that people are entitled to their opinion, and that's one of the values of who we are as a country. We just have to figure out how we navigate that, and do it very carefully, where it's not about punitive circumstances.
Right. Yeah. And what kinds of messages can university leaders put out to their students, both student leaders who might be in student government or in other student organizations, and are looked to frequently by others, or the presidents of universities? What can they say and do to promote a climate that welcomes a diversity of freedom of expression, but also those values of inclusion and acceptance?
What I would add is that, one, we're always talking to the students about they're engaged. It's not someone else's job to make these conversations happen. It is not on university administration alone to facilitate these dialogues. It is within student orgs. What I've said to students is, you sit in a classroom and something is said, you can address it. You are in a residence hall and you see something happening. You can be a part of a conversation. You can be an officer in a student organization, and you can help because all members, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, and again, free speech, you think about the coalescing of different points of views that help you to fill in blind spots. And I think about being a driver in a vehicle that's got some major blind spots. When you have a passenger that's able to say, hey, I don't know if you see that, they have a different perspective. That doesn't mean that you are still not the driver, but it does mean that they add to you being able to navigate a course to get to where you're trying to go. So, and the other thing that I would add is that these conversations are not outside of the academic experience. It has to happen in the class space. It needs to be happening in student organizations. It's happening in conversations with our communities, that we are open and supportive of multiple perspectives, not a singular approach. And that means we all have to be open to the way that we might have siloed thinking of our own.
Greta, I might just jump in and suggest a historical perspective on this. Very often on campuses today, it's more conservative speakers who are unwelcome. It's conservative views that are less well received. But 2020 is the centennial of women's suffrage. It was 1920 when women first had the right to vote in a presidential election. And that came after generations of suffragettes and their supporters marching and demonstrating and protesting and agitating. Not everybody wanted to hear what they had to say, but they persisted, they spoke up, and the result is a more equitable society today. And fast forward to the 1960s and 70s, there were anti-war protests, there were protests supporting racial equity, there were protests in the 70s supporting gay rights. Not everybody wanted to hear all these views either, but it's important that we did and that we do. So I think those today who want to disinvite certain speakers to campus or not listen to certain points of view, ought to remember that that variety of viewpoints really made some tremendous progress for our country over its history.
And Greta, if I could add one thing, I think
Sure.
Carol's remarks really brought to the fore kind of a issue that is before the country right now, and that is, how do we talk about race? How do we openly talk about race? And there are those who feel stymied and don't know how. And I think it on those college campuses, it's so critical that we be open to it and have the discussion and allow it to occur, because I think the country will be better for it. And if we want really collectively to address racism, we've got to get at the heart of it by listening, talking, exchanging. That's what I think is critical for the future of the country.
Yeah. And I would also add, and I really echo Carol's remarks, this issue of, does free expression impede the values that we have for inclusion and diversity is something that we've talked a lot about as we've had open fora about our free expression statement. And this is what I remind folks all the time. I think we have to acknowledge that in terms of free expression, the microphone is not always, or the platform, open to everyone, that there are certain underrepresented groups who may not feel they have equal access. We have to acknowledge that reality, but at the same time, as an educator, I can't allow our underrepresented students, our students of color, LGBTQ, whatever they may be, I can't allow them to stay in that place. I have to help them to look inside of themselves and to develop the agency so that they can then produce some kind of counter speech, either by actually speaking, by writing, by protesting, or whatever. But if we allow them to stay in that place of, oh my God, I'm traumatized by this, I'm pained by it. I mean, I've been pained by lots of things in my life. You have to keep going. If we allow them to graduate from college and university in that space, we have failed them. We have failed them because they're not going to. Yeah.
No, I was going to say they're agents, not subjects. And unfortunately, they position themselves as subject of someone else's behavior instead of agents who can implement change that can bring about dialogues. And absolutely, we cannot let students graduate thinking, now that you have a degree, here's a diploma, now go be an adult. Like that, we cannot have our students thinking that it is the bequeathing of a degree that allows them to be someone who is a change agent. We allow them to practice. We don't even allow them. We provide space for them to practice on a college campus in an environment with educators and those committed to their success so they can hone the skill set. This is just as critical as the skill set for whatever profession they're looking to aspire to join. So absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if I can add, the Women's Suffrage March 100 years ago did not necessarily include Black women. And so again, as we talk about groups where movements have taken place, not all have been a part of those movements. So we continue to find ways to bring others into it. And it's special for me because of the sorority that I'm a part of. The first act that they did was to march in the Women's Suffrage March, because there was a recognition that the march that were taking place were not including Black women. There were threat of violence and all of the other things that have happened, and that's still happening. So as we watch, but what we've seen is that for Black women, they've moved from the back of the march to leading the march. So there is space for people to lead conversations, dialogue, and change.
Great. And I wanted to follow up with a question from an audience member, Larry Moneta. He is the recently retired Vice President of Student Affairs at Duke University. And he asked, how is a campus to strike a balance between support for open expression and support for those pained and traumatized by what may be said? In my reporting, I've seen examples of students really pushing to have certain speech censored or taken away because of how hurtful it is to them. Is that even possible for a college to do when it happens on social media or happens on the campus, or is the answer to respond with more speech and learning from the situation?
I certainly think it's.
You want to know from me? I think always the answer is to respond with more speech. And I think, and so that may sound like a facile answer, but I think it's incumbent upon us, when I say us, I, my colleagues at the university, to work with our students, to understand, yes, we understand it's painful. And in some cases, I mean, I know myself, I've been through that. When I'm a cellist, I'm a Black cellist who lived in Germany for many years. And it pained me in Germany that whenever there was a review about my playing, they always talked about me being a Black cellist. I just wanted to be the cellist who was interpreting music well. But I got beyond that. And I think somehow we have to help our students. Our students are very strong. They're not shrinking violets. They're not snowflakes. But sometimes we allow them to do that. By trying to coddle them too much, we have to help them reach inside themselves and figure out how they are going to counter whatever is they're experiencing it. And yes, it will not be easy. It will not. It's not easy. But if we don't do that, by the time they graduate, I think we have failed them. I really do.
And I would just add that part of the role of a university setting is to build the character of the individual. And in the process of doing so, make them aware of all kinds of prejudices, biases that they're going to experience throughout their lifetime, and prepare them to deal with it, prepare them to educate, prepare them to lead. That's one of the roles, I think, of a university, because if they are not prepared to do all that, they will see a lifetime of being the victim rather than being the person who's out leading and educating and making the world a better place. So I really don't shy away in any way at all from hate speech and allowing free expression. I do shy away from protecting people and not readying them for the world that they're going to experience, and let them know they can make a difference, they can lead, they can educate, they can give those who are white, who are biased and prejudiced, an awakening to what it's like, the experiences that they've had in their lifetimes and what they don't want to see in the country. That's all healthy debate so that we can have the kind of folks who graduate from there with the right character to go on and be a leader in the community at large, so that we can have a really equitable country finally, unlike what we have today.
I try to make the point to students with whom I interact that the world beyond the campus is not a safe space. And this is the time in your life when you need to have these experiences. You need to be exposed to ideas and people who may make you feel uncomfortable, because that's what you're going to encounter later on. And for those who don't want to entertain a particular speaker on campus, I suggest there are several alternatives. One is to ignore it and not attend. Another is to have your own event, and that's happened in a number of cases simultaneously or otherwise. Or thirdly, my preference is to come and engage the speaker in a respectful way, to challenge the ideas that you don't think are appropriate, that you may find inoffensive. And I've seen that happen too, and that's when I'm particularly proud of the students who come and engage the individual in debate. So I think we have to have those opportunities for our kids, because that's going to fulfill our educational mission more successfully.
And if I can add, I keep saying it. One of the beauties of being in a university environment, again, is that it's not just the students, right? We have to recognize that faculty and staff, likewise, are navigating the same challenges in their spaces at the university as administrators that are trying to help students navigate a different perspective, and then in the communities where they live. And I'm fortunate within the portfolio that I have, we're also looking at children that are K-12. So, I'd love to believe that at the university, by the time they've gotten here, we would have had some experiences for them to have exposure, to be able to see. And I think that that's a process for at least education, to look more broadly at how, again, so we're talking about the civic engagement and some of the curricular things that are happening in K-12. Those are going to be necessary, because at the university, by the time they've gotten here, there's a lot that we're expected to do. And I think in creating the spaces where students are learning how to navigate, one, the space that's there, certainly how do we address the speech? But I will also say that institutions should be providing resources. So I would look at restorative justice as one of the ways that if there's an injury to a community, that there's a way through a process of restorative justice where people can come together to learn how they've hurt and or harmed members in their community. That there is a way to look at counseling services where you have trauma informed or other resources that are available for individuals who have been subject to hate speech and other racialized incidents. It also requires having some cultural and race and ethnically driven curricular because elements. Because to think that within, again, the academic environment, that the only space that we're going to be able to address it is in these kinds of environmental spaces where there's speakers or the rest, but we're not talking about African American studies. We're not talking about Hispanic and Latinx studies. We're not talking about indigenous experiences so you can understand the cultures, because that education allows people to be informed about diversity, not through the frame of defending a position, but really understanding culture. So
yeah, definitely. And I want to pivot a little bit to the role of government in this conversation. We've seen over the past few years some states putting out laws that enforce campus policies. For example, some of them get rid of free speech zones on public campuses. I think in an effort to protect conservative students on campus who are usually the minority. President Trump put out an executive order not too long ago, kind of reinforcing campus free speech. And I wanted to start with you, Governor Douglas, if you could talk about whether government should have a hand in enforcing or reinforcing the values of free speech on public college campuses, or if institutions should be able to lead that discussion and enforcement themselves.
Well, although I was a public employee for most of my working life, I don't believe that government is the answer to everything. And I think the role of our task force is to design strategies and suggestions for leaders in higher education so that they can initiate these important steps and design practices and values and policies that work for them on their campuses. So that's my first choice. I think leaders in government should, as the two senators who kicked off today's event did, articulate an overall commitment to free expression. And I hope everyone in political leadership will do that. But I really think that the leadership of our colleges and universities ought to be where we look to take this message forward.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Governor Gregoire?
I agree with Jim totally. I believe that if we're going to be successful, it's got to be a relationship between the leadership from the faculty and the administration on a campus to the students. How do they collectively decide how they want to go forward and embrace the First Amendment and free speech? I don't have any objection to government expressing support and providing funding where it's critical to make some of this happen. Back in my day, I'm sure it's shocking to most people, we actually had civics classes in high school and so on. Well, that's a clear thing of the past, and it is a clear need for the future. So providing that kind of funding, like the senator said, I think is important. But again, every university has its own culture and its own kind of relationship between the administration and the leadership there and their students. That's where they can really frame this so that it can be successful. But for government to put its thumb on it, I think will lead to failure, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Crutcher, Dr. Sumner, did you have anything to add?
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And not only that, but I also would say, we have on our University of Richmond campus, we've actually been engaged in an iterative, deliberative process leading up to this statement that that's going to be endorsed later this month by the Board of Trustees. And what I did when I put the task force together, I said to them, and by the way, this process also included inviting people like Bob Zimmer from the University of Chicago to come and talk about the Chicago statement, Fred Lawrence from the Phi Beta Kappa to talk about, he's an expert on First Amendment, and Zach Wood also. And what I said to the committee is that I don't want necessarily to use the University of Chicago statement. It's great for the University of Chicago, but I want a statement that it's true to the traditions, the values, the missions, the vision of the University of Richmond, and that's what we have. I mean, that's really, and now the entire community has spent 3 years deliberating over this. My board's wondering why it took 3 years, but you know, those are universities for you. But we're almost there. In 2 weeks we'll have the statement. But definitely the government. I mean, I'm happy to have government supported. And by the way, Governor Gregoire, I was born in 1947. I had United States civics, a history of Ohio, and history of Cincinnati in elementary school.
Oh, so many things. We also had cursive writing, but that's a whole other thing, right? So I was having that conversation with my children the other day. I was like, I write everything in cursive. And someone else, my daughter or someone was saying, yeah, that reading in cursive is like reading code anyway. I just think about how important it is. And I think back to we the people, right? And we the people are creating a culture. And that is within the institution. And what I've often said, and the way that I've positioned diversity, is that none of us are the same. Every single one of us are different. And I've kind of laughed to myself, but also publicly, that I wouldn't want to meet another Carol because she's a lot of work. Another Carol Summer, not another. And that I want to meet other people. And since I've been here in Lubbock, there have been so many things that I've learned that I, as a person that has grown up in an urban environment, although I was born in Austin and summered in Dallas, we lived outside of Chicago. There were so many experiences that I had, and the benefit of being a part of this community is that we are scripting what it looks like to be a Texas Tech Red Raider. You can hold it against me later, but I'm putting it out there. And that we understand that we're trying to bring other people in there, but it also requires that we have to look internally. When someone else is doing it for you, you're not responsible or required to have to do that own kind of assessment of what are my own biases? What are my own limitations? What am I not being able to see in my own experience? And sometimes outsiders can do that, but more often we have to be willing to do the work. And I don't think government coming in and necessarily telling us this is how you need to do it. It takes some of the responsibility also away from the people who should be looking and saying, how do we do that? Someone else tell us how to.
Mm-hmm. And you all mentioned some form of civics or, learning how to engage with others in debate in high school level classes, but is there any room to incorporate that kind of learning into freshman orientation or some of the earlier general education classes that students take when they arrive to campus? Dr. Crutcher, would you like to start?
Oh yeah, we're discussing that right now, and I'll give you just an example. We have about 30% of our students are students of color, 10% are international students, and I was having a conversation with the granddaughter of one of my mentors who's here from New York City, from a very wealthy family. And I said, okay, what's your experience been like? She's a freshman. And she said, you want me to tell you the truth or you want me to sugarcoat it? Just like her grandfather would say. And she said, well, all my friends are rich white girls like me. I thought I was coming to the place that was really diverse. And so I said to her, well, and of course, it's difficult under COVID restrictions, that, you have to work harder. She's going to be in my wife's mentoring group, so she will learn. I mean, she's already met other folks, but our students, at least in my experience at the University of Richmond, they want to meet people who are different from them, who come from different backgrounds and races and cultures, but they don't know how. They're afraid they're going to ask the wrong question, and someone's going to diss them, et cetera. And so one of the things that we're looking at is incorporating and perhaps using something called that my wife and I have used in our mentoring groups, the Open Mind platform. And the Open Mind platform is a way to help. It was developed by the Heterodox Academy to help students, young people, understand the importance of having a variety of viewpoints on a particular subject or topic. And it's amazing how that has opened up our mentoring group to have these authentic conversations. I mean, it works like we used it for 3 years. It works like a charm, but we have to be those of us in higher education have to be intentional about how we introduce the students to the university in a way to help them learn how to bridge those gaps, if you will, to have the difficult conversations, to be authentic and to be real. And unfortunately, as I think you all know, social media doesn't help us here. You know, the call out culture, the cancel culture is not very helpful in this regard. And so it's an uphill battle, but I'm determined that we're going to find a way to help our students gain these skills early on, because then they have 4 years to practice.
Yeah, we started with new student orientation, but I would share we even took a step before that. I send a letter. My team worked with admissions to send a letter on behalf of the chief diversity officer talking about how we are an institution that values diversity and that there's a way for you to find your place here at the institution. And so it is a letter from the chief diversity officer to all admitted students. And then they are able to explore the different programs that are a part of the division, the programs and student organizations that are a part of the institution. And let's be clear, every negative incident is not one that would have to make you stop and is negative in terms of what it can mean in terms of change. So out of the incidents that we've had in the last couple of years, we've also looked at how are we training our student leaders in student organizations, because they're recruiting new members. So it's not even just that we're trying to bring new students in and helping them, we're simultaneously having these conversations and talking about leadership and what does diversity look like. The Big 12 presidents worked with our Big 12 conference, and we're working with athletics to look at how are we going about engaging with the athletic experience of students. So it's in every facet of the experience. We're trying to make sure that we're different. The pictures that you use that show students engaging in different dialogues, it's in reflecting faculty members that are on all sides of the aisle and straight down the middle. Like it's how we go about sharing a message that reflects that we value multiple perspectives and experiences in life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in passing, Greta, you used the word debate, and I wanted to cycle back to that because I think that's an area where student involvement can make a tremendous positive difference in their experiences. I'm on the board of the Coolidge Foundation. We have high school debate programs. Colleges and universities have debate teams that compete intramurally and intermurally. And that often requires a student to take a position that may not be his or her own. And I think that's a valuable experience to have to articulate somebody else's view. And I really think a debate program, I realize it's perhaps not for everybody, but can make a real positive difference.
Yeah. I do want to move on to some audience questions because we have a little over 10 minutes left here. This one comes from Dr. Jill Crichton. There are non-government organizations currently doing this work on campus free expression that are directly connected to professionals within higher education. How will the BPC engage with those agencies to forward this type of work? Does anyone want to start us off with that one?
Well, we're going to deploy our staff, Jackie and Dr. Hayward, to work on that because we want everybody in the discussion. We need to have the best ideas on the table. We need to be coordinated. We mentioned earlier that we don't think government is the main focus point of these efforts, but we want everybody at the table. So thank you, Dr. Creighton, for the suggestion.
Yeah, and what I would say is that I'm on a special committee of the Virginia Bar Association that had, before I joined this special committee, a whole task force dealing with this particular issue. And so I think part of our role should be to learn as much as we can about what's being done by both individual organizations and other entities in this space, because there's no need in reinventing the wheel. But I do think what I think we're trying to do is to provide some guidelines and resources for folks to turn to, folks in higher education and other entities to turn to as they're dealing with these issues.
Mm-hmm. And I'm a part of a couple of different work groups. And certainly as we look at policy and, through the frame of DE&I, we're looking at policy, you're looking at COVID, you're looking at the race relations and all of the things around racial and social justice. And I can give you a real life example of something that's a moving target. So you're looking at a lot of students that are in online classes. And so people are starting to create policies around civility in an online classroom environment. Well, you cannot cross the free speech by saying, those that engage in prohibited speech or, inappropriate speech. Again, the policies start creeping. If you're not engaging those that are involved in that work now, you really are not really able to capture some of the nuances. I mean, there are ways that we can generalize the work, but more broadly, you need to be able to look at how things are changing in a very dynamic way. Online environments are really a very different space. One of the questions that I'd asked of a group that was at Tech was how they were saying that a conduct issue would be around the use of a mute button. And I had to ask, so are we now saying we're going to have an issue around speech and the mute button? Like it's trying to navigate, we need as much informed input as we can possibly get.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I would add to that, Greta, is as I look at the necessity for the community at large to support a college president, I think we need to support all of the faculty there. We're asking a lot of them to engage in these kinds of very difficult questions and to be able to deal with the person who feels they have been victimized and so on. So not everybody's comfortable with this. Not everybody has the tools to do this. So I think we need to find some supportive mechanisms for everybody on that campus to be able to foster this kind of openness and exercise of free speech in a civil way. But that's going to take the entire campus community to be able to make it happen.
Right. And another question.
You've hit on a very important point, is how are we helping faculty? And staff, but how are we helping faculty? One of the first interactions and opportunities to engage with BPC was in an event that they held in the early part. It was just this year. It feels like it was 10 years ago, but it was in Florida earlier this year. And we were talking about some of the incidents that had occurred where faculty members felt as though they weren't able to express themselves out of fear that students were going to take a video excerpt, put it up online. We saw what had occurred from a couple of different faculty members and the experiences that they had afterward. And so, it's how are we learning our teachers, learning centers, for faculty development? How are we talking about engaging in these conversations? And likewise, when you have faculty groups that are not very diverse, and they want to have these conversations, but they don't, what are some of the potential seeds that we can give them to help facilitate their own dialogues?
Mm-hmm. And there was one audience question that did ask how professors should engage students on free expression. This is from Carolyn Cooper. She asks, in the classroom, how should professors present a range of viewpoint to be sure to introduce students to many ideas, even if some students find them offensive, versus creating a space that is inclusive to every student? And another question from Corrine King also kind of touched on this. She asked, are there differences between speech that occurs in the classroom versus what happens on the college quad or out in campus space in general?
Well, at the University of Richmond, in our faculty development and research hub, we have an inclusive pedagogy program, workshop, as well as a learning community. And viewpoint diversity is one of the things that is discussed. It is how to promote viewpoint diversity in your classroom and how to facilitate conversations that may be difficult at times. Because what I heard a few years ago from faculty when I was talking about the need for us to help our students learn how to have these conversations. A faculty member said to me, the faculty need to learn how to have these difficult conversations as well, and how to facilitate them. So that's, I mean, and while we've gone through now 3 cohorts in 3 years, eventually I think that's going to have an impact on empowering the faculty.
We have a faculty fellows program here at Tech, and it's been going on for a number of years. And I came in and recognized we didn't have anything for staff. And so, students are interacting and meeting with staff in advising offices. They're engaging with staff members in different environments. And so as they're trying to figure out, well, how do I also facilitate these conversations? We're trying to give them, you don't want to give them in a space where there's already a high stakes. You're wanting to be able to give people an opportunity to learn where there is the space to learn. And I think one of the things that I would share, the difference between, and I can step out there for me and say, the difference between what happens in a classroom and what happens on campus is that the conversation in the classroom is more than likely relative to the dialogue of the class. So when you're talking about the environment in a classroom space, there are different things that will come up in the course of that conversation. The challenge is when it starts navigating away from that, then students start raising that it's not on topic and that there are other things that might potentially come out of that. Whereas on a college campus in an open space, that conversation can be anything from politics to how you feel about life and where you are in terms of your faith. It can be anything about whether or not that, I was at another institution for many years and there was a whole conversation around spandex pants. So, I mean, there are just all of these different opinions, and universities are spaces where people will come to express them. They don't all have to be people from the campus environment either. And some may know this, there are those that travel. So they may not even be individuals from your local community that are coming onto college campuses that are seeding these conversations. And again, we being aware of those things and then being able to say to our campus community, how do we go about engaging? Do you create another event? Do you stand and engage the speaker? Do you simply walk away? Those are your options.
I would also, another good resource for faculty in this regard is, I mentioned it before, the Heterodox Academy, whose purpose is to promote free inquiry. And if you go, look on the Heterodox Academy or just Google search Open Mind Platform, it's free of charge. That can be very, very helpful to faculty in these areas as well.
I was just going to suggest, Greta, that we do indeed have to protect the academic freedom of our faculty, but it's a two-way street. When students come to me and say, I really don't feel I can express my view in Professor so-and-so's class because he's way at the other end of the political spectrum, that's a problem too. So we have to look at it from the perspective of the faculty and of the student and find a way where the community is welcoming to different points of view all across the board.
Governor Gregoire, did you have anything to add?
Well, the only thing I was hearkening back to this idea of giving the tools to faculty members to have this discussion in the class. And I agree, it has to be on subject, but there are ways in which there are tools. I happen to have been a debater. I happen to have a law degree. And there are ways in which in that classroom you can say, does somebody have a different point of view? Or let's take this point of view. Can somebody represent it? Can somebody articulate it? To get them, no matter what the subject material is, to get them to start getting in the heads of the other person, which is what lawyering is supposed to be about. Now, I'm not going to take all the criticism, pushback on that, but that's what it's supposed to be about. So if you can get them to start thinking what's in the head of the other person, why do they feel that way, and have them articulate it, then you begin the process of seeing that kind of growth in the individual to be able to have a civil discussion, to be able to relate to other people, to be able to have good discourse. And that's what we're supposed to be about. But again, not everybody has those innate tools. and need some help. And so we need to be there for them so that they can communicate in a manner that helps those students develop.
And I think that was our final audience question. So thank you so much to our panelists and to the Bipartisan Policy Center for having us. I'll turn it back over to Jackie at this time, I believe.
Yes, thanks, Greta. Well, I want to extend too my sincere thanks to our panelists today, Dr. Sumner, President Crutcher, Governor Gregoire, Governor Douglas, for just your insight about the state of campus free expression on our college campuses and about the work of the task force in the months ahead. And Greta, thank you very much for so ably moderating the conversation. I do want to also again thank Senator Coons and Senator Cornyn for their remarks to frame our conversation today. And I'd like to thank our audience so much for taking time today. I know many of you are on college campuses. It's the last week of the semester or penultimate week of the semester for many of you. I know it's a busy time. It's been a very hard semester, and you're looking ahead to another challenging semester in spring 2021. All of us at BPC send all of you our very best wishes for a safe, happy, and successful semester, and the same to all of you who are listening today. I do want to invite all of you to learn more about our programs at BPC. You can visit our website at bipartisanpolicy.org, where you can subscribe to our Campus Free Expression monthly newsletter. So thank you all again. Good day.